Hello, everybody. A warm welcome from Berlin. I'm not going to say as usual, as usual. I'm today with Zane again, and we want to talk about some basics that we've done years ago, and we want to reintroduce it because we found out that this kind of knowledge has been lost somehow. So we want to re-record it into this video, and there's documentation and blog as usual. And we're going to install Netcool, OMNIbus and Netcool Impact in a demo training type of environment. It's not a production installation, so it's a demo kind of installation. Pretty easy installation, straightforward, and we want to show you what it is. And today I'm again with Zane, my very special dear friend out of London. Do you want to say hello, Zane?
Hello.
Yeah, that was great. So here's the agenda. So we're pretty much following the blog that Zane has published. So it is going through all these headlines we are providing in this video, how to do it, what to do it, the pitfalls, what to do, what not to do. We are going to provide you a link into this blog as well as we do have the documentation link at the end of the video. And here's the blog, a very short link into that. Zane has created that, and here it is. So have a read. And I think without further ado, demo time. Zane, over to you. Have fun. Take it away.
Thanks, Fred. Okay, today we're going to go through this blog. First of all, why have we made this blog? Why have we making this video? Well, many people are asking me questions day to day, setting up an AIOps POC, and they find, well, I need to use some Netcool probes. I've got to get some events from traps or syslogs, therefore I need a probe, therefore I need OMNIbus. Oh, and by the way, I need to do this integration with this third-party system, which we don't have a connector for. Oh, so I'm going to need Impact too, right? What I've done is I've put together a set of instructions that if you follow them, you will successfully install OMNIbus and Impact in under an hour, get your system up and running and ready for use. In a following blog, we will be talking about what we do next, which is installing AIOps on top of that. And without further ado, let's go through this. And basically what I've done is I've listed out the steps from start to finish, including all the things which wouldn't normally appear in the documentation necessarily, or you may have to hop around. So for convenience, I've put all of the steps in one page, so you just have to follow in the list. Okay, so let's go through this blog then. So the first step we're going to do is provision a VM. Most deployments of Netcool are done on a Linux VM. And if you're doing a proof of concept or something like that, a suggested configuration would be Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9 virtual machine, 16 cores, 32 gigs of RAM, and say 300 gigs of disk. Of course, you can have more than that, but that would be what I would recommend. There's a link to other Linux operating systems in the blog. So if you have another flavor of Linux you'd rather use, you can check to see if it's supported. The next step, these are all sort of like Unix sort of administrator things that are often sort of assumed knowledge, but oftentimes can be accidentally missed. Then you can run into trouble because you haven't got this or you haven't got that package and it's not the latest version, etc., etc. So for completeness, I've added in a section here, update the operating system. So the first thing to do is to update the system, yum update, and then install unzip. Unzip is used later on when we start to set up, unpack all the packages. Make sure you've got that. Running these commands, if these packages are already installed, doesn't hurt. It will just say, well, this is already here, and move on. That's fine. Just run the commands as they are. And then the next thing is all the prerequisite packages for Netcool OMNIbus and Impact are listed in the next section. So again, I've put them here so you can conveniently just sort of select, copy and paste to your command line and then install them all. So the little Y switch just says automatically answer yes to install this package, because otherwise it will say, do you want to do this? And you have to type in yes. So if you add the switch as I've listed here, it will just do it. So 32-bit probes and gateways, you install these. If in doubt, just install all of these packages that you see on this page. It won't hurt anything. It will simply make libraries available should they be needed. If you wanted to open any desktop GUI components like the native event list or the Netcool administrator, it's quite likely that you will want to do this. So you may as well install all these libraries too for the native event list, and then Netcool administrator packages that are needed, more probe and gateway support packages for 64-bit, and then there's a few others for MIB manager, the ObjectServer itself, and the process agent. Then this is quite an important step. After you've done all these updates, restart your box. Make sure that all of the changes and updates you've made take effect, and now the system is all fully updated and fully prepared to start installing Netcool and Netcool parts. The next section talks about creating the necessary users, groups, and setting permissions on the installation directory. So Netcool software should be installed as a non-root user. This particular set of instructions, as is quite common, uses a user called Netcool, and that user must be a member of the NCO admin group. That group is particularly important if you're running the process agent, for example, in a production system, because there's certain functions that require the existence of this user. Out of just convention, I guess, just use the Netcool user and the NCO admin group. Conveniently, there's a set of commands you can copy and paste to create that group, create that user. This one in the middle, you'll have to set a password. Where I've got set password in brackets. Obviously don't copy and paste that, but you'll need to set a password for whatever you want for the Netcool user. And then you'll just change the ownership of the ops directory to be owned by the Netcool user and the NCO admin group. If this is a VM that you're using for a POC and you're only running Netcool stuff on it, you could do this. This is actually not a problem. If you're running other stuff on there, obviously you wouldn't want to just recursively change the ownership of the op directory to Netcool, because you might have other things running in there. But if it's just a fresh VM that you're using just for this purpose, this is fine. The Netcool user will need to create subdirectories within opt. If you are running other things in opt and you don't want to change the whole ownership to the Netcool user, then consult the documentation and pre-create those subdirectories manually as the root user, and then assign those to the Netcool user instead. Right. The next step, set up the environment variables for the Netcool user. Add the following environment variables to the bottom of your newly created Netcool users.bashrc file. Set of environment variables, or the locations listed here, they are all the defaults. So if you want to keep things simple, just install OMNIbus and Impact using all the defaults, which is the most convenient way to do it. Then you can just use these defaults here. Just copy and paste those, put them in the bashrc file, and then load that. That means all the needed environment variables are already there. They're all loaded. And when you go to install stuff, it will just pick up on those and everything will work. The next step is where you acquire and copy the installation media to the VM. So in this particular scenario, I'm using the IBM Installation Manager, this particular version, 1.8.6. I'm using the bundle for Netcool Impact, as you can see here, 7.1 with FixPack 26 preloaded. And then I'm using Netcool OMNIbus 8.1 with FixPack 28 preloaded. So 3 zip files. So this is where you'll need to make sure that the unzip utility is installed on your VM, which we installed earlier. Right, so then in this example, let's assume we've downloaded those. They're now sitting in our temp directory. In this example, I'll copy all the installation media to opt software and unpack them all ready for installation. So if you have these sitting in your temp directory, then you can just actually copy and paste this entire block, and it will just move everything into the right place and unpack it all ready for installation. And then when you go to install the various products with the installation manager, you'll be able to just copy and paste the paths as they are on my blog, which makes things very convenient and fast. So once you've done that, the next step is to install the IBM Installation Manager. To do this, you'll need to change to the Netcool user. Everything from now on should be done as the Netcool user. So everything up to this point is done as the root user to sort of prepare all of the directories and unpack and move all the data, all the installation packages around. And then the actual installation steps are all done as the Netcool user. So now we're the Netcool user, you can just copy these 2 commands. First, install the installation manager, cd to the location of the software, and then I have conveniently for you prepared the command you need to run. Again, it's using all the defaults for everything, just installing it, accepting the license, and just installing it, which is mostly what people want, rather than having to pick through all of the minus help options and trying to figure out which ones they need and where the things should go. I put it here so it's very convenient just to copy and paste. Note this little backslash here, this is just telling you over 2 lines. So you might want to copy this first into a text editor and then remove that carriage return and just paste it in as a single command. Once you have installed IBM Installation Manager, it's now time to run it. So again, as the Netcool user, we're going to cd to this directory and we're going to run it from the command line. So the command line makes it very convenient. If you don't have like direct console access, you wouldn't easily be able to run it in the GUI mode. These instructions assume you don't have direct console access, and it's all done via the command line, which is what will be the case in most cases. You run this utility with the -C switch to run it in console mode. So then the next step is to add the various software repositories to the installation manager. So navigate through the menu options and add the following software repositories: option P, option 1, option D to add. So when you run it, you'll see the list of menu items, but this is just sort of guiding you to get to the right place. These are the two repositories you want to add. As you can see, one of them is OMNIbus and one of them is Impact. Once you've added those, all you need to do is navigate back to the start menu of the IBM Installation Manager and then choose option 1, install software packages, and then you will install OMNIbus. Note, we're not going to install Impact just yet. There's a few things we need to do first because when you install Impact, it depends on an OMNIbus object server already running. We're just going to install OMNIbus, and then we're going to configure OMNIbus, start an object server, and then we'll come back and install Impact second. So you've completed your OMNIbus install. It should take like a couple of minutes at most, and now you're ready to start configuring it. Okay. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to edit your interfaces file, which is this file here, again, as the Netcool user, and then you're going to simply add this entry at the bottom. Right. So obviously netcoolserver.ibm.com, replace that with your VM's fully qualified domain name or host name. That's fine, or IP address even. But yeah, basically you need to put an entry here. Once you've done that, there's a note there to give you some extra tips. Once you've done that, you need to run this command to generate the interfaces file from the omni.dat file, and then this command will actually build a new object server, and it will configure it as an aggregation object server, which is the default configuration. And then this third command simply starts that object server, right? So if you've done everything according to the steps, you will now have an object server running and ready. Right, the next step is to log into the object server and configure some users. So we're just going to use this command here, the insosql command, to log in. You notice the password is ZZ. That's the encrypted version of a blank password. When you first create an object server, yeah. When you first create an object server, it will have a null password for root. Right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set it to something. So in this case, I'm going to make it a highly secret password there, Netcool. The next two steps are we're going to create an Impact admin user. Now this user is used by Impact when you log into the Impact GUI. Because the Impact server by default uses the object server as an authentication source, we need to make sure we create that user in the object server first. So we create the user and we set the password Netcool, and we're going to add the Impact admin user to the system user group in the object server and then quit. Right, so now we're ready. We've set up our users, the system's running. We may want to start a Simnet Probe. Simnet Probe comes with OMNIbus in the base install, and it's useful for just testing out your event list and making sure you can see events coming through. So you can do that simply by running this command. Start the Simnet Probe with its default configuration and simply connect it to your object server. That's it. Okay, and then finally, we're going to install Netcool Impact. We're basically going to repeat the steps further above where we started the installation manager, this one here. Run IBM Installation Manager. So we're going to go back, run it again. This time round, we are going to choose option 1, install software packages, but this time we're going to choose Impact. We're going to install Impact. We're going to accept all of the default settings. At a certain point, it's going to ask you about connection to the object server. So if you recall, our object server is running on the local machine. So we can just put our host name for the host name and 4100 for the port, right? If it asks you about users on the object server, the root user and Netcool is the password. And then when you're setting up the Impact administrator, it'll be Impact admin and Netcool. So these questions are asked of you as you step through the Impact install. It's not particularly difficult, just sort of have to have an idea about what to answer in each case. For the rest, you can just accept all the defaults. That should be fine. Once you've finished the installation, it takes a little bit longer than OMNIbus to install, probably maybe 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. It will complete. It will say completed successfully. At that point, just exit it. And if you do a little PS command in your terminal window, you should see these two processes running. So one of them is the server and one of them is the GUI server. Right, so then there's some final notes at the bottom. Congratulations, you've now installed both of these, OMNIbus and Impact, and you can start working with them. So some little additional notes here at the bottom. You may wish to download and install the latest patches for Omnibus and Impact from Fix Central. As you saw before, they're already pre-patched to a certain level, but you might want to go and get the latest ones. That's up to you. You may wish to download and install other Netcool probes. Say you want to receive traps, right? You might want to install the SNMP probe. So the installation process is exactly the same. You just put it in temporary directory, say ops software, like we did in this case, and then add the repository to your repositories and then run the installation process. So there's a few links here to some sample ones which are popular: message bus, SNMP, syslog. You may optionally want to set up Omnibus in a resilient manner with a backup object server and optional collection layer, right? So this is more if you were doing it in a more production sort of type scenario. Documentation on how this can be set up, it can be found here. So there's a link to that. You may optionally configure Omnibus and Impact to automatically start when the machine boots. So instructions how to do that. And then there's a link here to the best practice guides for both Omnibus and Impact can be downloaded from this point here. Tips for setting up the AIOps Netcool connectors can be found in this blog. So there's a link to that. And what we're going to do in our next video is how to actually install AIOps in under 2 hours. And then once you've done that, then you can actually then use the Netcool connectors to connect to these Netcool assets. And just finally, a grateful acknowledgement to one of our colleagues, Francesco, whose information this blog is based on. I've used his documentation over the years a lot. Having all of the sort of steps in one place has been extremely valuable. So thanks, Francesco. Okay, back to you, Fred.
Wow, that was really cool. We do have another source of truth. So here it is. So we do have the infamous IBM Redbooks. So what we've discussed now is a demo type installation. So single probe, single impact instance, single object server, no multi-tier architecture, no resilience in this kind of thing. If you want to go into a multi-tier environment, for example, a 3-tier environment, if you want to use the other extensions and parts that we have in Netcool, for example, Network Manager, Configuration Manager, do something more complicated, it is all described in these Redbooks. So have a look for IBM Redbooks and Netcool. There are 3 of those. And in the IBM Netcool Operations Inside Deployment Guide, so this is for version 1.4, but the current version 8.1 of OMNIbus and 7.1 of Impact is not so different. So therefore, they're still very, very applicable. So they're a few years out, but the basics have not changed that much. You can go into details into these kind of things. A few things are completely out of date. So for example, alert notification does not exist anymore. A few other updates in here as well, but the basics are still there and pretty cool. They're all the nitty-gritty details. For example, if you want to set up Dash, if you want to go into other configuration items in here, these are still valid in here. Even the multi-tier architecture is explained here down there a little bit. So this is the introduction of the overall thing, a few sample things, and we do have here it is. So this is a 3-tier architecture with a collection layer, an aggregation layer, and a visualization layer, a display layer. On top of the Dash, you have additional servers here for history, for impact, a failover thing. This is a fully resilient setup. This architecture picture does not include any probes, so you can set up the probes also in a resilient way. So they shadow each other. There's a primary and a secondary probe, and if the primary fails, it switches over to the backup, yada, yada, yada. All these kind of details, all that explained in this Redbook. And so that's it for the demo. Further information we do have here in the documentation piece. So there is the Omnibus documentation as well as the Impact documentation. You have the link here. This is the Omnibus link, and if you choose your favorite search engine on the internet, it's very, very easy to find the Netcool Impact documentation as well with the installation guide. Well, all these details are there. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Zane, for putting it all together. And I'd like to thank you, the audience, for spending again some time with us on this video, and see you another time in another video. Thank you. Bye.